Hey guys, I'm back with Please Don't Die, written by Stephen Camarata. This is a future New York Times bestseller. You'll see that I'm correct. Who knows when, but I will be correct. Anyway, thank you for listening. This is Chapter 10, Miami Heat. After graduating from Paul Smith College, I applied to and was accepted to Florida International University in Miami. I absolutely loved living in Miami. All my friends were there, and some of them went to the same school. My roommate was a South Beach model, and I tried my very best to never let her know that I had a secret crush on her. She had lots of connections to the South Beach bar scene and oftentimes would get me and my friends into the most exclusive clubs with no line and no cover charge. And also, she was very touchy-feely, which worked to my advantage in several ways. Walking into clubs hand in hand with her, I always felt like $1,000,000, and most certainly the other club goers, both male and female, probably just assumed that this beautiful gal was my girlfriend, even though I have never so much as even kissed her. Which is funny because my roommate, to this day, Dave, thinks I banged her. I never did. So anyway, there's that. Another thing that made me feel like $1,000,000 was the drug called ecstasy. I'm not sure what the kids are calling it these days, but back in the club days, we called it rolling, and it was marvelous. Whoever coined the name ecstasy really nailed it, because that's exactly what it felt like. In my life, I have always been quite comfortable talking to girls, flirting with girls, and getting my way with girls. However, whilst on the drug ecstasy, my game was redlined to a whole new level. My charisma was explosive. I felt like I was on top of the world, and any girl that I talked to, they knew it. I would walk into any and every club or bar like I owned the place. How I have never contracted HIV or AIDS or some other horrible sexually transmitted disease is a mystery to myself, as well as to every primary care physician I've ever had. The dance floors were so packed on the weekends it would blow your mind, and sometimes your load as well. The majority of the South Beach, Miami club scene girls were always dressed to kill. Glorious fake breasts popping out of loosely fitted summer dresses, often worn without the accompaniment of panties. These girls had sex on the brain. What a coincidence, so did I. They didn't even want to know your name, which was fine by me. You could literally have sex on the dance floor with a complete stranger without anyone even giving you a second glance, simply by strategically positioning yourself behind her, unzipping your pants and lifting up the back of her dress. My signature move to pull this off started by getting a girl to dance with me, and from that point it was as simple as getting my lips on one of their earlobes, and it was it. Game over. The lure of passionate earlobe kissing is too powerful for most girls to resist. I would intertwine my fingers with their fingers and hypnotize their hands to make their way slowly to that special area directly between their thighs. It was simply magical. Fortunately, I made it through those wonderful South Beach nights unscathed, disease-free, and without so much as even a broken heart. Living in Miami, working in Miami, and going to school there, it was virtually impossible to avoid the omnipresence of cocaine. It was everywhere, and it was extremely cheap, especially if you had the connections that I had cultivated since the moment the wheels of my Florida-bound airplane hit the tarmac and I arrived fresh on the scene. I always had enjoyed occasional cocaine usage from an early age. It was never really a problem for me as far as the addiction aspects of frequently using this drug were considered. From the onset, I had a very strict rule when it came to using cocaine, and that rule simply was, and that rule, simple enough, was to never under any circumstances snort cocaine after midnight. I lived by this rule always until Miami. The midnight rule went from stopping at 12 a.m. to try not to do it past 3 or 4 a.m. to staying up wide awake for 2 or 3 days. I kept a stash of Rohypnol, also known as roofies, to help bring me down from also commonly known as the date rape drug, on hand at my apartment to use as what we called landing gear, to help bring me down from the routine cocaine benders and finally get that much needed sleep that my body desperately needed. Eventually, I started to hate cocaine. I hated what it was doing to me, and I began to always feel guilty afterwards. I hated how skinny it was making me, as well as the negative impact it was having on my swiftly dwindling bank account. I made really good money in Miami, only to spend most of it on cocaine. Something had to change. As much as I hated cocaine, the big problem was that cocaine still loved me. I did so much blow back in the early 90s that eventually I could no longer get high without immediately getting a nosebleed. I had literally destroyed my nasal passages. I could no longer even taste my food. I would always get what we called the drip. Everything seemed to either taste like cocaine or in some way would remind me of cocaine, thus triggering my diseased brain to seek out more and more cocaine. Initially, I would only use cocaine with friends on nights when we would go out and enjoy the Miami nightlife. But eventually, I was bringing it with me to school and doing it between classes in the FIU bathrooms. I started to bring it with me to work, where I was a waiter, and I would several times have to excuse myself from the table in the middle of telling the specials because my nose would start bleeding at the table. It was terrible. People began to notice that I had a problem. I had to do something. My solution to the nosebleed problem came in the form of crack cocaine. And this was the beginning of the end. Fortunately, not the end of my life, but the beginning to a learning experience and one of several building blocks that would eventually end in my sobriety and recovery from all drugs. But this was not an easy road. I loved crack. It was super addicting though, and as crazy as this may sound, I decided to try and use heroin as a possible tool to get me off of using crack. With my newfound love for heroin, I had adopted a very strict rule that to this day has never faltered, and this rule was to never, under any circumstances, use heroin 2 days in a row, and God forbid, if I ever did, don't ever use it 3 days in a row. I was at a very low point in my life. I was fired from my job, and I was kicked out of college. I began mixing drugs. I would crush up amphetamines during the day for quicker results and do heroin at night. I was in a very bad place and I needed help. I'm getting the drip just talking about it. Clean 25 years, by the way, guys, just so you know. I just got to let you know that. But anyway, almost done with this chapter. I needed help. It was to be my mom and dad once again to the rescue. I called them in tears one night and told them everything. I begged them for help and they were on the next flight out to Miami. They helped me dry out, and I'm sure that it must have been an emotionally devastating ordeal for any parent to go through, but they stayed by my side and helped me slowly and painfully get through it. Sometimes in life you have to hit rock bottom before you can begin your ascent back up to the surface. In my case, once I hit rock bottom, I started to dig even deeper. Heroin withdrawal is extremely painful. It is no fun trying to get clean. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, sweating and curled up with my knees pressed firmly into my chest, rocking back and forth in extreme physical pain. I felt like I was being stabbed with knives. I wouldn't wish these moments on my worst enemy, but I, however, had only myself to blame. I dug this hole but with my parents' help, I was steadfast and determined for this hole not to turn into a grave. That's the end of that chapter.